And that was my actual entrance to blockchain. I've come back from academia, moved to industry, but kept talking about this to the Israeli Pirate Party. I kept calling it crypto governance and was like explaining to people that I've seen the light in academia. In 30 years at most, this will come to market because that's typically the time it takes to take a technology from
30
science.
years.
30. That's typical time it takes to take a technology from science to deployment, to widespread deployment in the field. If you think of RSA and other cryptographic techniques, they were invented by the RSA, right, Rivest Shamir Adelman in the 70s, late 60s even, there were a lot of work. And it was really only come to market in the late 90s with Zimmerman's PGP and the early 2000s with banking, online banking and e-commerce, which was enabled by being able to write your credit card on the internet and transmit it securely. This science exists since the 60s and 70s. If you were the president of the United States, you could talk to the president of China, of Russia, over a secure communication line enabled by this kind of technologies. However, if you were a simple citizen, you didn't have access to such technology. And there was a gradual process of democratization, of adoption, that caused you to be able to now have Telegram and everything is SSH, is HTTPS now. And so everything we send online these days is encrypted using these technologies that 40 years ago were only available to president.
This is episode 27, and I'm your host, Andre Delpkerk. You can find me at It's DeAndre on Twitter, as well as the show at Pioneers Show on Instagram. This interview was done last year during the Startup Night in Berlin, organized by Deutsche Telekom. It was an amazing event with a lot of startups and great opportunity for people to network in Berlin. I really had an amazing time, and that's where I met today's episode guest, one of the speakers at the event, Elad Verbin. Elad is a mathematician, computer scientist, and a great thinker, and one of the investors at Berlin Innovation Ventures. In this episode, we actually go through a lot of topics, from the future of AI and ethical AI, ventures coming from the academia, cryptography, and the future of blockchain. Well, it was a huge amount of topics that, not for loving the conversation, but because it was almost midnight, the conversation has ended. But worry not, we are to schedule another conversation in the future. He's looking for investments in algorithmic innovation, and it's an area that's a lot of upside for sure. A lot of people might know that technology built in the academia actually comes to the real world in a few years along the way. However, not a lot of people know how far along these ideas come from. This fascinated me. Elad is always looking for what he calls R&D startups, and I find this once again fascinating, giving knowledge a platform and also runway for the next innovative ideas coming from the theoretical worlds. I don't want to take a lot more of this intro, so let's jump into the conversation with Elad. Welcome to the Pioneers Show, Elad. How are you?
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to have you here on the Pioneers Show. And let me just mention that. Where are you from, by the way?
I'm from Israel, born and bred.
So it's a great pleasure to be here on Startup Night, organized by Deutsche Telekom and a lot of other big partners. We already talked with Cem, the founder. And let me tell you that you're the first Israeli entrepreneur that I get to talk here on the Pioneers Show.
Oh, wow. That's exciting. I love being the first.
It's also your first interview for a podcast, correct?
It is, yes. I've been listening to podcasts for my adult life, but I haven't been interviewed on one.
So this is
thanks
the first
for the opportunity.
time. No, thank you. So for people at home that don't know who you are, care to give us a presentation about yourself?
Yes. So I'm a computer scientist turned startup scientist turned investor. So I got my education doing a PhD in Tel Aviv University in algorithms. Moved to 2 postdocs, one in China in Tsinghua University under Andy Yao, who is this famous computer scientist that was faculty and won all the Turing Awards and the Gettle Awards in Princeton, and wanted to go back to China and basically jumpstart the computer science scene in China. I was one of his first postdocs there. I moved to another postdoc in Aarhus University, and I moved to industry, being the lead scientist for a hedge fund in Israel. And I always wanted to move to Berlin since 2007, actually, when I first came here and saw what a great potential this city has to offer. And, how we get to build something here for ourselves. So I moved to Berlin in 2015. Did some industry work and realized with some friends and colleagues back from Israel that what this city needs is not more smart R&D experts, but rather smart R&D investors. Because
R&D investors. Can
yes.
you care to explain what that is specifically?
Yes. So we talked to founders, to Berlin founders, startup founders a lot. And what we discovered is that the investors don't understand what they're trying to do. The Berlin startup ecosystem is based on e-commerce traditionally, because that's what started here the most. Berlin was in a way a spearhead for e-commerce in Europe, and was super successful doing that
through Rocket Internet and its ventures, yeah.
And it did amazing things to the startup ecosystem in the city, but it also defined it to a large extent. So business angels and other investors in Berlin would expect you to satisfy the metrics that are set, that are typically satisfied by e-commerce websites or startups, which is exponentially increasing revenue gradually. And these are not the metrics that we know from back home. So with my 2 Israeli colleagues, we know the pattern of startups that start by developing, by a year or 2 at least, of developing defensible tech, meaning tech that can't be easily replicated and relies on highly technical innovation. And then once you have this moon technology or sci-fi technology, either you fail in developing that, which is a good thing, right? You want to fail early in developing your core. But if you do succeed, you have something that is true, sci-fi capabilities that you can then build a market on. Israeli startups have the other problem that they sell too early rather than becoming sustainable long-term businesses. We can go back to that, but they do this first stage of developing technology really well. We came here and we realized that this doesn't exist so much in Berlin, partly because the metrics, the KPIs for this are not there. No one will tolerate a startup not making money for a couple of years just developing tech. So we met a lot of founders like this, and we realized we have a lot of. So we were in the beginning, we were really unhappy and maybe. We were unhappy about that because it meant that as consultants or as startup employees, we couldn't do the thing we are best at, which is developing technology. But at some point we realized that this might be a huge opportunity, because if no one does that, we can be the first. And we set up what we didn't know what it's going to be. Will it be an incubator, a company builder, and a VC? And we quickly realized that if we are to do something new like that, it has to bring its own funding for a long term, because the knowledge or the infrastructure to do this didn't exist back then. It's a bit better now, but so we have to bring the money with us for a long term runway, and so it pretty much has to be a VC. So we started making, pitching this around and talking to experienced VCs, Blue Yard System 1, many others, and we realized gradually that we're not the only ones in Berlin that's doing this. We are one of the only ones in Europe. So we're doing, it was a big revelation. It kind of came gradually as we realized that really experienced VCs are asking us for advice on estimating tech risk and figuring out the potential of R&D heavy startups. And we were like, why are they asking us? And we gradually realized they're asking us, even though we're the new kids on the block, they're asking us because
you have the right knowledge.
We are the only one. And they didn't necessarily know how to evaluate us. But I mean, we have some social proofing from Israel, but really it's because we're the only ones who even claim to have this ability to evaluate tech startups. To high-tech risk, very early stage startups where there's two founders with an idea and some high potential, high risk idea that they say, we'll implement this amazing algorithmic venture and this will be sci-fi and we can build a business on top of this. And we found that no one is even claiming to be able to evaluate whether they're able to develop this thing or what is the potential of these algorithms. So we found ourselves in this really lucrative position, and we are, to summarize, so I've started as a scientist doing algorithms and complexity theory and lower bounds and stuff like this, bit of game theory. Started in academia, was supposed to be kind of meant to be an academic for many years, and gradually was disillusioned with the academic publish or perish system, and felt like I am maybe not as adapted to it as I would think, and I explored industry and loved it, bringing these scientific ideas to the market. So moved to be a startup researcher, and then to an investor, and now we are launching probably around November our first fund, Berlin Innovation Ventures, but probably rebranding as Moonmath Capital.
Moonmath Capital.
Yeah.
It's a catchier name, even though Berlin Innovation Ventures, it's easier to remember because Moonmath, you can blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
This is my opinion though, but
yes.
But I think that Moonmath, it's almost like the moonshot thing, the moonshot factory from Google. Yeah. So I think that's a really good name. One question that I would like right now to tackle is that you're not the first one that I've had this conversation, but I seem to feel like the movies kind of screwed us up in the sense that I never thought I would see so many startups coming from the academia and from PhD. I never thought that was a thing. I always thought that PhD was that the geek thing that's reading something on a library. But apparently the more I read, the more PhD candidates bring so many interesting ideas that I never thought of it. Why do you think that there's such this stigma about outside perspective? I'm not coming from inside the academia world, but why do you think that so many people disgrace the academia when we're talking about entrepreneurship?
There's a few levels to unpack here, because I'm actually a bit suspicious of the ability of pure PhDs with no prior industry experience to start sustainable startups. Partly because I come from academia and because I'm a startup innovator that comes from academia, I know how hard it is to move from academia directly into startups. So, wait, so what do you mean disgraced?
I think that a lot of people, myself included, through a lot of years until quite recently, I never thought of this, but I think because of movies like Social Network, reading about stories from Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, people that dropped out of college and were able to create such big behemoths, that people start looking at academia as somewhat disposable.
I see the myth of the college dropout. I had this tweet the other month, maybe, of someone saying, if you really want to get to have marketable skills and to be successful, you shouldn't go to a college. You should go work for free for 3 years at various companies that do the things you want to learn. You learn much more and have marketable. You've seen that?
I think so. I think Gary Vaynerchuk said something similar to that.
Maybe. And I replied to that. I'm usually try to not be too contrarian over Twitter because the context is very hard to capture in 140 characters.
No, it's 280.
But, only if you're special.
No, I don't think so.
Is it?
I think everybody has access to it already.
I think maybe.
But yes, you're saying.
So I don't agree with that. I mean, this time I was tempted to, I did a reply because you can have, 3 years of industry experience are better than 3 years of college, but 10 years of industry experience plus 3 years of college is better than 13 years of industry experience. I am a huge believer in the power of academic education.
Over the long term.
Over the long term, to open your horizons, to teach you not only what you want to do, but why you'd want to do it, to tell you about what kind of fields of knowledge is out there. We should really separate the American education system that is more general, like horizontal, than the German and Israeli education system that's like based on one field that you choose in advance.
I think that's generally Europe as a general. I think it's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, I think the Brits do it like the Americans more or less, but it's complicated.
In Portugal, you choose a thing and you go through it.
Yeah, as well. I like both systems. I slightly prefer the Israeli one or the European one, but in general, I think that even that you get exposed to so many fields of knowledge in academia that you then know that they exist, and I got a lot from my academic education. I think the myth of the college dropout is, we look at the soccer. You can't decide what to do. If you want to be a basketball player, you can't decide what to do by looking at the NBA players. There's so few of them saying there's a confirmation bias in there, or a selection bias rather, saying let's look at the people who were more successful and do what they did. Very often these would be the people who got lucky, maybe, the people who got more visibility. Partly there's a feedback effect of the people who you wouldn't expect get more recognition. So the college dropouts are more visible, even though a lot of the founders are, the Bill Gates type. So Bill Gates has some academic publications in my field, actually. I referenced the Bill Gates paper with Papa Dimitriou in one of my papers. So he had a more traditional education. A lot of the startup founders that really matter are PhDs, and a lot of the startup founders that really matter are not PhDs, but employ a lot of PhDs and have co-founders that are PhDs. I think an academic education is very important. It teaches you to think in a methodic way, analytical way. And I really estimate I have a high esteem of people who didn't go through academia at all. It's a matter of character.
I understand that, but one of the things that I don't know how to put this, but you said that we cannot, we want to be basketball players, we should not look at the NBA because it's a very small sample size to be able to emulate, because there are so many factors that can come into this equation that you will never be able to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Thing is, it is my assumption that to be an entrepreneur, there are much more copyable, I won't say skills, but things, behaviors that can help you succeed. Might not reach Steve Jobs, might not reach Elon Musk success, even though right now that might be in terms of the things that Tesla's going through. But okay, let's call Jeff Bezos, which is at the top, maybe Jack Ma or something like that. You may never reach those heights, but there are a simple set of behaviors and skills that you can maybe acquire to reach comparable in comparison to my level right now. So if I know that you studied computer science, you're a PhD, your knowledge will be much bigger than mine is.
Different, just it will be down a different path, I would say.
But I think, for example, computer science specifically, it's a very, very valuable skill in all countries, in all languages. You don't need to learn German to be working in a German company or in Germany with a computer science degree.
Yeah.
Or some computer science knowledge, rather.
Yeah, but you don't need a PhD to
Of course.
do valuable work in computer science. If anything, a PhD is a weird thing to do because so at some point the academia realized that it's taking all of these PhD students and there are not that many jobs and there are many PhD students, and at some point it became common knowledge that as an advisor you should be taking the PhDs or the students who want to be your PhDs and telling them, listen, why do you want a PhD? It's probably not for you. PhDs are weird things. They're basically an academic license to procreate. That's their only function. The only difference between someone who has a PhD and not is that someone who has a PhD is allowed to train other PhDs.
Oh, that's the difference, right?
I think so. The degree doesn't mean that much. I mean, what were you conferred? What's the value of a PhD? I mean, it's some signaling, but mostly the real only actionable difference is that you're allowed to give PhDs or allowed to advise PhD students.
So the main difference between a master's degree, be it an MBA or a Master of the Science or Master of Arts, and a PhD will be that distinction, and
the only actionable difference. So that's the value. I mean, the common thinking is that a PhD does not have industry or marketable value by itself unless you're continuing in academia. In Germany, that's not exactly true. In Israel, it is. No one cares that someone has a PhD in Israel. If anything, it might be negative signaling, meaning that you make bad career choices.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know about the US, but I suspect it's the same. Germany has high esteem for PhDs for a reason that historical reason that I'm not able to fully comprehend. But PhDs are weird. The main reason to do a PhD is because if you're really fascinated by a topic and you want to study it for a long term without needing to actually justify that to anyone beyond curiosity-based research. It depends on your field. I'm talking about the more scientific and more theoretical fields. And then you're doing this PhD, you're presumably thinking about being a professor, like I did. And maybe you're hoping to be one of the top professors in the world, like being a top 100 or top 200 computer science professor is a bit like being an NBA player.
Really?
It's a unique thing, meaning you're at the absolute top of your field. But it's a weird thing to aim to, because most people won't be at this 100, 200 top people. Most people will be at the 10,000 level. And I think by comparison, to be a startup founder, you shouldn't look at Jeff Bezos or Zuckerberg. You should set your goal somewhere around the startups that actually bring value to humanity, significant value. Maybe there's probably 10,000 of them. And you should look at the top 10,000 startup founders and say, what do they have in common? And I think the thing that they have in common is not that they're college dropouts.
I was having the conversation the other day, one of the episodes that was already recorded, it was that if we think real hard, right now I can only remember 4 dropouts. Zuckerberg.
How many PhDs do you remember?
I don't know. I can remember of 2, the Google guys.
The Larry and Sergey, yes.
But outside of that, I don't remember. But dropouts, I think of Larry Ellison, Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates.
Mm-hmm. Bill Gates wasn't a dropout.
Wasn't he?
I'm pretty sure he wasn't. I know his academic papers, so you know.
Okay, probably. But okay, then 3.
I know his advice. I know the guy who he wrote this paper with.
Okay,
He's
then
an
it's
amazing Greek computer scientist.
Then let's even short it out.
Yeah.
3.
Yeah.
Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, and Larry Ellison.
Yeah.
I can't think of anyone else who reached.
I think there's a weird fetishism with academic degrees. I think some people overestimate them massively and some people underestimate them massively.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, they're not that important one way or another. You should do the thing that would get you towards where you want to be and be most valuable to you, to society, to the people around you. And for some people, that's a PhD. And for some people, it's working in some other stuff. And that's fine. Making the right choices about how to spend your time on Earth is the most important thing.
Taking that on the segue of spending your time, going back to some of the things that we already touched base with. You said you are an RD investor.
R&D, yes, research and development.
So do you do the research and development on companies that are mainly focused in the beginning in R&D, or is R&D investment a different kind of investment where you do other things that normal VC world might not do?
So let me start by giving a little bit more background, right? So, we'll start from the beginning. A VC is a body or a company that takes money from investors and allocates it to startups in exchange for equity, typically. Now there's also token investments. So we are glorified money managers. We, like a hedge fund manager, like a banker, like an investment manager.
With much more risk, though.
With different profile of risk. We take money from entities that have money to invest. They typically don't give us all their money. They give us 1% of their money. Most of their money should be in real estate, in bonds and other stable elements, but some of it should probably be in tech. They give us money to invest. We collect some tens of millions of dollars that we call upon as needed. We don't hold them in our bank account. We take a little bit of this as a management fee. It's typically 2% a year. It's enough to run, to keep the lights on and to pay salaries. And we take the vast bulk of this money, and we try to make good investments with it. And good investments mean those that will have good return of investment over a while. We are able to make really long-term investments, probably the longest you can find outside of government investments. We are typically able to invest for 10 or 12 years. That's unusual. And we put this money into startups that we believe in with high conviction. Very few startups. For us, it would be six startups a year. Invest this money, and basically by the financial explanation of this is we buy equity. Like the startup issues 100% of stock. We buy 10% of this stock for example, in exchange for 300,000 euros. Now we hold this equity. What we want is that at the end of the fund, most of these startups will fail. Some of them will fail in the form of getting sold for not that much more than was invested in them. Some of them will be actually successful but won't reach their vision that they set out for themselves. Some will outright say, well, this is not working out, let's do something else. And few of them, but hopefully an important few, will succeed in actually reaching their vision of providing a very new thing in the world. We are choosing the ones that are focused on tech development, meaning algorithms. So for us, we invest in algorithmic startups, meaning startups that algorithms and new algorithmics is the core of their innovation. We make very early stage investments, let's say these 300,000 euro investments into a team of, let's say 2, 3, 4 people, that this money will last. Out of a round of, let's say 700,000 or $1 million, this money will last for maybe a year and a half. And this startup has just started. We typically are the first investors in the startup. And the thing that's unique about us is that we take a startup that's at very little funding, and we make it into, and we try to get it from a place where they have ideas that are based on some academic work, and try to make it into a place where these ideas have a POC and some market
proof of
concept, yes, and some market some algorithmic tenability, proving that these algorithms really stand for themselves and are able to be deployed in a real product. And at that point, we are where an e-commerce startup starts. So by the end of this year and a half, these algorithms, this startup has proved that the scientific ideas really can work, and now they can start selling it and make this revenue happen.
When you talk about algorithms, first of all, Can you give an example of a company that started as an algorithm company?
Yes, so Google, I think, is the most classic example. Google and Skype, I think, are really great examples. So Google, if you remember what the world was like when...
I don't.
Yeah, I'm an old guy by now. I'm 36. I remember the first time I literally remember the first time I saw Google because someone showed it to me in the university, in the computer science lab in Schreiber building in Tel Aviv University. Someone told me, look at this amazing thing. A good friend. And I was like, yet another search algorithm. I'm already very comfortable with Yahoo. I'm not very good at early adoption. And I was like, what's the problem with Yahoo? And he's like, no, this is a new thing. You have to see it. So he told me, what do you want to search? And I told him what I want to search. And he wrote the words and the thing came up. And he was like, look at how great these results are. You didn't have to find a particular index where this is, but it's not like Hotbot either or Alta Vista. It actually finds good results. And I was hooked from the first day. It was like unbelievable results. And that's what a true algorithmic innovation looks like. Larry and Sergey invented with their advisor. I'm blanking on who it exactly was. I forget who it was. He's a great computer scientist in Stanford, I think.
I don't know.
Caltech.
Sorry.
Anyway, so they invented a system, the now famous PageRank algorithm. They invented an algorithmic system that captures something that's truly valuable, right? The value of a website as expressed or as measured by the amount of links pointing to it and their value themselves, right? This kind of PageRank, like the eigenvalue base, there's some linear algebra in there, but basically if a lot of web pages point to you and they're really good web pages.
And the amount of time that someone gets you on your website, everything.
That was not in the original PageRank.
Really?
Google doesn't really use PageRank anymore. They have, progress beyond that. But the original PageRank algorithm was very pure and a very clean concept and super powerful. It's someone figured out how to capture the value of a website in a formula or in an algorithm that can be computed. And that was the big innovation.
Now, I have a big question about algorithms. And in today's age, I think it's very important to tackle. It's just that algorithms, at the end of the day, were built by humans, correct? You can add preconceptions that might be harmful.
Yeah.
Let's take into example, I don't care if it's right or left in terms of the politic area, but if someone is building the algorithm, there will be some biases there that might not be interesting, or they might be at some point even dangerous.
Yes.
What's your opinion in this situation?
So I think this is a very important thing for us humans and regulatory entities and societies to think about. There's a great book that I can recommend about this called Weapons of Math Destruction by I forgot the author's name. She's great, Cathy O'Neill. So it's a great book about this. And if you want a more technical treatment, there's a whole work group and conference dedicated to this, run by my academic colleagues, called by Moritz Hart and others. This is called the FATML, so Fairness and Accountability in Machine Learning. It's a great conference. They published the papers online. You can read about them. You can read them. So there's a lot of thinking about how to measure bias, how to avoid bias in algorithmics, and this is really important for us to talk about. The reality is that there's bias in every system in the world that's created by humans, in government, in law, in the economy, in startup night.
Sorry to interrupt. The thing is, let's take Google for example, and I think Google is supposed to be and right now it's built like this. It's the end-all, be-all solution for search and for discovery.
I mean, that's what
it's supposed to be, at least.
No, it's supposed to be a company. I mean, it was built as a company that's supposed to satisfy the needs of most people most of the time. And their need would be to find results that are somewhat useful for what they're searching. It's not trying to be fair. We should not, this comes up in blockchain a lot, we should not put our ethics on artifacts of technology. We should rather realize that these artifacts and the incentive systems that create them are not built for keeping our ethical preferences in mind. And we have to control these ethics in some way, such as us coming together for collective action or regulation, or choosing us as people choosing to use the more ethical alternative. There are many ways to try to make the world a more ethical place, but none of these come from hoping that these incentive-based systems magically do the thing we want them to. I think that's removing responsibility from ourselves and putting it where it simply can't. There's no system for putting it there.
Yeah, but what I was saying is, and focusing is just that I'm honestly very scared of algorithms, and when algorithms are supposed to be consumer focused, because then you're on the mercy of the biases of the people that created those algorithms, and when it's mostly information based, you're going to lose information because, I mean, in code, possibly in the algorithm building, there might not be enough. It's like that idea of space. If you change half a degree to the right, in the first 2 meters, you won't feel a difference. But after 10 million kilometers, you will be millions of kilometers apart.
Yeah. There's an Obama quote about turning a ship very early. Your job as a captain is not to turn a ship massively, dramatically late, but turn it early by a few degrees.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, I think his interview with Mark Maron, I think. It's beautiful.
And I think that when we're talking about algorithms and in terms of algorithmic information based, I'm not talking about algorithms in terms of how to do machine learning and AI, but my main concern, honestly speaking, is that if you have a bias on the building of the algorithm when it's consumer focused, let's say YouTube, let's say Facebook that has its own algorithm, let's say Twitter, let's say whatever that's supposed to deliver to consumers at a scale, I think we're talking about something that can be quite dangerous in terms of misinformation. And misinformation in today's age is incredible. And I'm quite scared about that.
So before we talk about blockchain and its ability to curb this misinformation and possibly to make it worse, it has both
make it
potential.
Worse?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, we'll talk about that for sure.
We can get to that. Let me comment on algorithms in general. I think the risks that you point out are real in the sense that the algorithms, with great power comes great responsibility. Algorithms are very powerful entities, especially when they are running by themselves like they will soon. They're infinitely scalable. Once someone writes an algorithm, that algorithm can be reproduced infinitely and run by itself on data that is provided to it. And it's very hard to change an algorithm, especially if it was the result of a neural network, for example, but not just. So algorithms are incredibly powerful. And, it's like the atomic bomb. It can give you nuclear energy. It can give you nuclear bombs. Every technology in our history of humanity, of science, was used for both good and evil. The fertilizer, right? Fertilizer, the same technology that created the fertilizer created chemical weapons. The same technology that created the V2 rocket, the Werner von Braun rockets that hit London and, killed, tens of millions of people in both sides was also the technology that brought us to the moon. Technology, I wouldn't say it's free of ethics because it has a lot of the ethics of the people who created it, but rather technology can be used both for good and evil, and it's the role of our governance methods and we as mid-space squishy humans to decide how to use it. And I think the fact that technology is used for bad so much points to our disadvantages or weaknesses as humans in collectively acting and collectively finding the most positive sum. activities and ways to collaborate. This can also be improved using algorithms, of course. So it's a bit of a cyclical problem, but
it's a meta search, meta problem is.
Recently I've been thinking a lot about government as an algorithm. So taxation is a simple algorithm. For example, taxation is, the tax law is a set of algorithms that allow you to calculate how much taxation you'll give. Policing, and especially the legal system, is also an algorithm. It says if-then, right? There's a lot of if-then with some human judgment thrown inside of there. When you look at court proceedings and the way that the law is written, there's a lot of if-then rules that come to bring more predictability to these systems. So the way we govern ourselves is an algorithmic system that has a lot of disadvantages and is very legacy, and I hope we improve these algorithmics eventually. It also has a lot of biases, like every algorithmic system does. To summarize, I think that algorithms have the dangers that we put in them, and if we learn to collaborate with each other better, then these dangers will be lessened and controlled, and more of the good potential will come. But really, it's up to us as humans to work together.
Continuing the conversation about algorithms, but now changing for the thing that you mentioned before about blockchain. First of all, I seem to see that almost every blockchain project nowadays is coming from a very highly educated person, usually with a lot of R&D behind. So I assume that's something that you kind of are interested in.
Oh, I've been working on blockchain systems. Basically, this is a long story. Do you want it?
Sure.
So when I was a postdoc in China, I was a postdoc with Andy Yao, who was my computer science hero for many years before that. And he invented this field. Among the many fields he invented this field called secure multi-party computation.
I have no idea what you just said. Could you repeat that?
Secure multi-party computation. He published invented something called the Yao millionaires problem, which actually is very simple. I have some money in my bank account, so I have a number, and you have some money in your bank account, so you have a number, and we just want to know which one of us is richer. We suppose we're totally honest, so we use these numbers, we just take them from our bank account, but we don't want the poor one to be outed for how poor they are. So we only want to learn which of us are richer, but we don't want to learn each other's bank account.
Okay.
How do you do this magic? So he invented an algorithm, a protocol rather, for us to figure out which one of us is richer, but none of us learns the bank account, the balance of the other person. This was in the early 80s. This was the first secure multi-party computation algorithm. Since then, there were many others. My next postdoc was in Denmark, in Aarhus University, that were the first to take this technology or science rather, of secure multi-party computation and bring it to the field. They created a system based on game theory and cryptography to clear bit auction, markets, sugar bit markets. So Denmark has these sugar bits that farmers are allowed to grow only a certain amount, and there were some farmers that didn't want all these sugar bit allowances, and some wanted more. And they didn't want each other to know what the sugar bit allowances are worth for them. So this university that had great people to design auctions, truthful mechanisms, and also great cryptographers, created the first ever in the world software project to create and clear such a market without anyone learning anything about each other's private business secrets. These are even Damgard and many others. I did a postdoc, my second postdoc in this university. They deployed this project in 2008. And I saw this through both of my postdocs, this futuristic science become technology. And I was like, oh, this is huge. This is a field called sometimes private computation, sometimes zero knowledge. There was just a conference about it 2 days ago in Berlin called Zero Knowledge. There's a podcast called Zero Knowledge Podcast. There's great companies, Enigma, Qedit, that's QEDIT. Zcash is based on this technology. And I think it will come to market and be hugely influential in the coming decade or so. This is really cutting edge cryptographic science from the 80s. slowly becoming R&D, through a process of R&D becoming technology and now coming to market. And the huge superpower of this technology is creating private computation, meaning we compute something together, collaborate on computing a function, a process, while keeping all of our private information, keeping it private. Yes.
Basically building the process and everything that works in between, collaborating on that, but everything that is supposed to be private stays private.
Exactly. So this is useful for anything between social networks, auctions, governance, voting, taxation, various business processes, supply chains. There's so much work right now on supply chain, which is kind of a B2B collaboration, business to business collaboration by using zero knowledge. And that was my actual entrance to blockchain. I've come back from academia, moved to industry, but kept talking about this to the Israeli Pirate Party. I kept calling it crypto governance and was like explaining to people that I've seen the light in academia. And in 30 years at most, this will come to market, because that's typically the time it takes to take a technology from
30
science.
years.
30. That's typical time it takes to take a technology from science to deployment, to widespread deployment in the field. If you think of RSA and other cryptographic techniques, they were invented by the RSA, right, Rivest Shamir Adelman in the 70s, late 60s even, there were a lot of work. And it was really only come to market in the late 90s with Zimmerman's PGP and the early 2000s with banking, online banking and e-commerce, which was enabled by being able to write your credit card on the internet and transmit it securely. This science exists since the 60s and 70s. If you were the president of the United States, you could talk to the president of China, of Russia, over a secure communication line enabled by this kind of technologies. However, if you were a simple citizen, you didn't have access to such technology. And there was a gradual process of democratization, of adoption, that caused you to be able to now have Telegram and everything is SSH, is HTTPS now. And so everything we send online these days is encrypted using these technologies that 40 years ago were only available to presidents. This is the typical route that the technology takes from science, from being like the brainchild of scientists to adoption in the field. I saw this in academia. I was like, in at most 30 years, this will enable states to govern, to run on the blockchain. And I was like, it's kind of going to be like Bitcoin. But I couldn't kind of put it in clearer terms. Then I moved to Berlin. We saw Ethereum, almost me and friends moved roughly at the same time, my partners in the VC actually. We saw Ethereum roughly at the same time, 2015, or early 2016. Andreas Antonopoulos, we saw his talk about Ethereum. He wrote some great books about Bitcoin and Ethereum in Berlin, and we were hooked because this was what I was hoping for. I was hoping to see in 20, 30 years already existing.
Before you go on deeper into this conversation, what do you think it can be done to expedite that transition? Adoption
from science to... I gave a talk about this, actually. It's on YouTube, specifically about zero-knowledge technology, which is something that me and my partners in the VC are super excited about. We want to fund these startups and we want to get behind them because we think this is the future. And we also think that we are very early on this. We also think that we understand the potential better than many others. So a lot of what we think about, I'm a scientist, right? I know how to develop algorithms. I know how to think about scientific R&D. But since moving to industry and then to VC, I've been thinking so much about adoption and how to speed this up. And I mostly have questions. But in academia, you get taught that questions are the best things.
What kind of questions do you have right now?
So my biggest question is exactly how technologies come from science to research to deployment. That's the easy part. That part I know. Me and my partners know how to do. But from the time it's an available technology like PGP was, how do you get people to trust it? That is, I think, the biggest challenge. And I have some ideas about this that you can see in my talk. It comes between trust building, between communication tasks, between business development, between social proofing. You get the early adopters to kind of testify that it worked for them. Right. The question is between the first people using, the first hackers using PGP, and your family members, your parents using PGP. How do you...
PGP or PHP?
PGP is the pretty good privacy. It's the Zimmerman system, encryption system, I think based on RSA. It's the first encryption system that was available to the public. The CIA put an export restrictions on it, and he was actually prosecuted. I think it was dropped, but he was prosecuted by CIA or FBI or NSA, one of those, for exporting weaponry, because encryption was considered weaponry. And it took quite a while until the American government, in particular, realized that this technology is highly valuable and needs to be allowed to be exported out of the country. So PGP was an early available encryption algorithm. Encryption meaning point-to-point encryption. So the thing that allows me to securely...
To see a message from me on WhatsApp, for example, or on Telegram.
Without anyone being able to eavesdrop on us.
Interesting.
This was science from the 60s, turned into technology in the 90s, but only being adopted in the 2000s.
In the 2010s even, I think.
And the question is, what causes this delay? Why won't people just jump on it? And it's a complicated social problem. The early adopters need to adopt it and talk to everyone about it. And these are magic sounding technologies. Being able to communicate securely between me and you shouldn't be a thing that exists in the world. It should be impossible. The fact that it exists and can be mathematically proven is a total scientific miracle. Similar with zero knowledge. This is a miracle technology that we managed as mathematicians to prove that it's secure under some reasonable assumptions. But if you asked me, if I didn't know it's possible and you asked me, I'd say, I can probably prove it's impossible. There should be a proof, an information theoretic proof that you couldn't be able to securely transmit over unsecured lines.
But if you do that, then you're falling on that problem that we talked like half an hour ago, 45 minutes ago, about the confirmation bias. You're looking for a bias to prove something that's impossible, even though you already know that's possible.
This is how scientists work. They form an hypothesis, which is the hypothesis they feel like, using their intuition, and then they either prove it or disprove it. Mathematics and the empirical sciences are very different in that sense, because when a biologist formulates, or a medical researcher or a psychologist formulates an assumption, they would be fine with 5% that they gather some evidence, and they're fine with the probability of failure of 5% that they proved something and it's still wrong. If 20 of them do this for their favorite hypothesis, one of them will be able to prove this wrong hypothesis. Mathematics doesn't work this way. Mathematics, up to a first approximation, you can say about that some papers are wrong, but in general, mathematics, when you prove something, it's true, which as a mathematician, it gives me a lot of freedom to formulate hypotheses according to what I feel like and try to prove them. And if I manage to prove them, then they're absolutely correct. And if I fail, then nothing came out of it. So you could claim there's no social bias in mathematics. That's of course not true, because some unpopular assumptions don't get hypothesized by anyone. So we never get to prove true stuff that no one feels like proving. But it's for a different discussion.
Of course. So going back to blockchain, and I would like to ask you one question specifically, is that one of the things that I think that scares most people is that blockchain is still overrun by developers and engineers and very technical people with very technical English, let's call it that. I think that the problem...
Or Chinese or Russian.
Sorry?
Or Chinese or Russian.
Yes, but what I'm saying, English is the common language that people are listening to. And I think that one of the problems that people that are causing people not to adopt it, it's because it's still very technical. And one of the things I used to work in the blockchain space, and I talked with my girlfriend a lot about that, and she said, but I don't understand. I said, the thing is, you don't understand 99% of the things that we talk about or that we take for granted.
Cars, how does a car work? How does a spaceship work? Yeah.
I don't even know, go that far. How does the internet work?
How was my pencil produced?
how can I have 4G on the subway?
That's true magic. Yeah.
It's 3 levers of
Unbelievable, yeah.
cement. Then you have
No, it's
floor.
inside of the tunnel.
Inside the tunnel.
Yeah.
It's 3 meters of cement.
Yeah.
I have a ceiling. I have 200 people next to me.
Yeah.
How the hell do I have
Yeah,
internet?
Skype was a similar algorithms, really good signal engineering and algorithms. That's the secret of it. Skype was a similar thing. You know what kind of algorithmics you needed to transmit voice over IP in the 90s?
I have no
It was
idea.
insane. They did, and they enabled it. I mean, that's the power of algorithms. Someone smart runs and writes a really amazing algorithm, and you create superpowers for humanity.
And then
That's why we invest in
and
this.
nowadays you have hundreds of projects that have voice, that have VoIP.
But now it's not that interesting anymore. Now I want that project that allows you to do zero knowledge supply chains so that I as a business am able to prove to you that I paid an honest wage for my employees without you knowing how much exactly, how many employees I had or how much I produced. So I can prove to you stuff without revealing my private business information beyond the fact that I'm trying to prove to you. That's the magic we're coming to. Hearing aids that are just based on simple microphones for canceling noise from speech. Databases that are decentralized so that you can just host data on the cloud and at almost zero cost in a private way. This is a company we invested in called Haya Networks.
Higher Networks?
Haya, Haja. It's a Berlin Finnish corporation, a great company funded by also Outlier and Polychain and Creator. And they are building decentralized databases. So databases that are trustless, that are run on trustless infrastructure, and that are able to be a data source for algorithms for decentralized apps, which is now not really something that we have created, that humanity has created yet.
Oh, Elad, I'm pretty sure we could go on and talk for 7 hours plus, but I think it's already 11 p.m. and I'm honestly starting to get a little bit tired. Not of the conversation. And I'll ask you this on air. I don't care. Let's please schedule another interview.
Yeah, let's do that.
Please do. Because I think actually we have hours and hours of content that we can keep having.
We're both Berlin based.
Yes,
well,
we are.
It's a cool, relatively small city. We can intersect a lot.
Let's get our contacts and please let's do this. Before we finish the conversation, I always like to finish the interviews with a lightning round. Lightning round is really simple. I'll ask you questions and then you have less than 1 minute to answer. Tell me one book that has impacted you the most.
Yuval Noah Harari,
Okay, now
it's
I
probably
need-
a cliche. Yuval Noah Harari, The History of Mankind. I read it first in Hebrew.
Is that from...
Harari? It's this Israeli author. Is amazing. It's the New Guns German Steel.
Okay, could you send me that so I can...
Harari. He's amazing. It's his first book. Later he wrote. It says recommended by Obama and probably Oprah Winfrey and the whole thing. It's a cliche of a recommendation. Weapons of mass destruction. Actually,
I'm very interested
Impressed me a
in
lot.
reading that. Do you have any life motto or life quote that you like to live by?
Yes, actually. There's this Israeli journalist and writer. He's amazing. He's called Yuval. Everyone in Israel seems to be called Yuval. I forget his last name for some reason. Anyway, so he quotes one of the friends of his father that said, if you know in advance you could achieve something, you shouldn't. If you're starting on a project and you know in advance you can achieve it, you're aiming too low.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
love
can
that.
send you that
Please
blog
do,
post.
but I love it.
Yeah, I've become a big believer in high risk, high reward. Also in academia, actually, I did high risk, high reward research. You should aim to do the thing that you'll succeed in with probability 50%, maybe even 10%, which is how I'm acting right now.
In the VC world, probably it's 10% of success.
Yeah, you should do that because that's where your that's where you're really valuable. If you can do something with 100% probability, then too many people can do it. Someone else will just do it instead of you.
Instead of the opinion thing, I'll ask you this that I wrote down. What have you learned in the last 6 months that you couldn't have learned without your direct experience in the decade prior?
In the decade prior. Oh my God, I learned so many things in the last 6 months. So I'm a big idealist, and I look at something like blockchain technologies and decentralization that has so much promise, and I say, this will be amazing. And he convinced me, my partner, Luis, convinced me that it could be amazing, but usually we'll end up in the same place where we started, but a little bit different. Because what will happen is the same power structures will kind of co-opt the technology, and we'll end up with more decentralized ecosystem, but it wouldn't be a better ecosystem. It will just have its own ways of being difficult and biased and problematic, and hopefully somewhat better than the previous round. We see this with the internet, right? The internet promised communication everywhere in the world, and for people to be able to freely communicate with each other, and it totally fulfilled that promise. There was amazing work done, and everyone can communicate with each other, and they use this communication to spread cat gifs and fake news, and to dox each other, and to troll each other, and to flame war each other. We see that the fact that the idealistic promise was fulfilled doesn't mean that promise wouldn't create new difficulties in the world.
One last question before we actually finish it. If I gave you 6 months, once again, I like the 6 months timeline.
I work in 10 years.
Okay, if I gave you 6 months to prepare for a TEDx talk, and it couldn't be about blockchain or algorithmic thinking or algorithm building, what would it be about? Public
policy. The importance of public policy in everything that we do. Public policy is a special field. I listen a lot to the to the Weeds podcast, and they kind of got me to read a lot about public policy. And public policy is a very special thing, because most of the things I as a scientist work on is getting from 0 to point A. So I say there's no research on a topic, or there's no one knows how to do some target problem, to solve some target problem. I will get to point A. I'm so brave and so amazing. But public policy people are much more brave and amazing, because they get from point A to point B. And that's much harder, because you need to have, when it's not 0, there's a whole great public policy discussion about the healthcare of Singapore, system of Singapore versus the Obamacare change or revolution. And it was much easier to build a healthcare system in Singapore, because you started from nothing. It was a new country in the 60s. You just start something from scratch and you design it correctly. But taking a system right now that has people that are doing well and doing poorly, and moving it into a system where the overall is better, some people will lose out. And that's a much harder task. So I think this realpolitik of moving from point A to point B is fascinating, and I want to learn about it, and I think about it, because that's partly what business is about, moving people from one solution to another. And I would give a talk about public policy and how it expresses itself in various walks of life.
We went through a lot of themes today, and I'm not kidding when I say I really want to have you here on the podcast again. I want to talk with you 7 hours straight with sun outside and not completely night. Where can people find more about your company, more about you? Where can people connect with you?
Yes. So we have some internet presence. We'll have more and more. I've been doing a bit of writing on Medium. I have a blog post that got some attention, and I have like a drawer of 30 more that hopefully I'll get to publish as the time goes. And so my Twitter account is Verbin, Verbine. You can reach us at berlininnovationventures.vc, and just Google my name, Elad Verbin, and it's all pretty much available there. And if you're like an algorithmic based company, or founders that want to start a company and want to talk to us, please come talk to us. You don't have to be fundraising. We love talking to really great entrepreneurs, setting their aims at very high, very aspirational and high risk, high reward algorithmic development.
Well, you love talking with them, and I really, really love talking with you. Have a great time. Thank you so much for plugging into this episode. I truly hope you loved this conversation as much as I did. I really hope you reach out to Elad and get to know him and talk a little bit more in depth about whatever it is you want. I'm sure you'll have a chance to be totally enlightened. This, any other information that you might have missed, will probably be linked up in the show notes. If you enjoy this conversation, consider subscribing to make sure that this podcast grows and we can get to more people and help everyone be the pioneers of their lives and careers. If there's any feedback, please feel free to reach out to me on social media or leave a rating and review on iTunes. A big thank you to Elad for his time and to Tonka PR, the company that arranged this conversation to make sure that this happened and helping organize the Deutsche Telekom startup event in 2018. A big thank you for DJ Rodia for the music of the Pioneers Show. So, till next time, talk to you later. Bye-bye.